Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good. Very good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So, again, super excited to have you here for the second episode. So if you guys haven't watched the first episode, I highly recommend you go check it out. That will give you an overview of your life and a better introduction to who you are. And today's podcast is, I'm going to say, more out of self-interest for me. So the last podcast we did, I already know your story. You're my dad. Although I did, of course, learn a few things. Today's podcast is the reason why I decided to do it is because I genuinely want to learn from you about what your vision is for education, for the future of education. And so I'm going to formally introduce you today. So Salim Sahyoun, savior of the Western education system. The future of our children lies in your hands. And I know that sounds funny and maybe biased because you're my dad, but I do genuinely mean that. With the way the current Western education system stands, the debate I always have with myself is, do I want to send my kids to school? Like, do I want to send my son or my daughter to a high school if I'm living in the West where they're going to be indoctrinated with ideologies that I don't want them to necessarily learn, especially at that age? And some examples are kids are learning about it's okay to be gender fluid and there shouldn't be any borders with your gender identity, and they're learning that at 9, 10, 11 years old, which I think is unnecessary. And something that Joe Rogan said on one of his podcasts, I think is really fascinating, and many people, it's not something that's really talked about. And he says, so in the US, let's say me at age 12, if we were living in the US and I decide I want to change genders to become a girl. If I'm above the age of 12, I'm allowed to undergo surgery to complete my gender transformation. And so Joe Rogan was basically saying, wait, there's something weird here. If a 12-year-old wants to be a girl, okay, let's say a 12-year-old boy wants to transition into becoming a girl. You know, they're still 12 years old. Why should they be given so much responsibility to make such an important decision that they may regret for the rest of their lives and just be depressed once they realize that they made the wrong choice and it's not something that's easily reversible? So let's say they want to be a girl. Why don't they just let them be a girl? Like, why don't we just allow her to do her own thing? But why does she need to go the surgery? Why does she need to change her biology? And so that's kind of the starting point of where I want to start this podcast, is what is happening in the West and how have we gotten to this point, and why is the education system failing? So we'll start at university. I know both of us have a lot to say about university, especially those with the prestigious names that charge ridiculous tuition. What do you think is going wrong with universities?
Well, to answer that question, I think we need to go back to what's the role? What is the role of universities? And generally, what I think the role of education systems, education institutions, is to prepare children, prepare students for life. And to prepare them in the best way possible. You know, we could go into what that means, to fulfill as much of their potential as possible, to contribute to society, to keep evolution, you know, going forward. So it's sort of like, hey, young person, you know, welcome to the planet. We hope you will have a rich and fulfilling life and contribute to pushing things forward. To help you out on your mission, we want to share. There are a few things we've learned before you got here, in the hundreds of thousands of years before you got here. So we want to somehow get you started with that knowledge, as much of it as possible, so that you can add and you don't lose a lot of time rediscovering what we already know. So that's if that's the role, then I think the evidence, both from students themselves, but also the places they go to work, everyone, there is a lot of evidence that university is not preparing them for the real world. Students aren't happy in general. They don't see the purpose of what they're doing and the connection with the real world. And I had a career that spanned about 20 years. The second half of it, the last 10, I was recruiting people. I was in positions where I was recruiting people out of university, and also working on developing people at work, looking at performance. And I had even before I knew I was going to get into education, I had a very keen interest in why is it that certain people seem to have something and others don't. And the discriminating factors for me definitely did not point to university education. There were some students who had university educations from prestigious schools. Sometimes works out, sometimes it doesn't. Some who don't have any or not from prestigious schools. And there were, for me, discriminating factors were other things. There were usually things related to what was going on at home. And the quickest, my hypothesis, the fastest way to, or the most common trait I found, was people who started working at a young age, usually had something different. And it could be that there were that means there were a lot of factors around that led to that. So families that were modest or had modest incomes, so you understood the value of money, you had to work hard, it was character shaping, etc. So it certainly wasn't, so when I'm recruiting, it's certainly not the university degree that is for me a discriminating factor. And then we have evidence, of companies, a lot of companies today, even excluding university degrees from their recruitment criteria. If you have it, you have it. If you don't, you don't. But it's no longer a factor. That's definitely a trend. So what's wrong with universities? I think they're not preparing students for life. And I think students realize that, many students, and also the places they go to work, or if they start their own businesses. I don't see a lot of people saying, wow, that university education really helped me with my business.
Yeah, pretty much unheard of. And as someone who is currently in university, I'm in my second year studying exercise science, hoping to do a specialization in athletic therapy. When I was applying to universities and my peers around me were, still very unsure of what they wanted to do, I want to say even at that time, I knew that university wasn't really, in my opinion, the right path for them. I don't think you should pay, especially to those going to the US, I don't think you should have to pay $40,000 US just to get a basic business degree where you're learning from a professor who has never opened his own business. All he's doing is essentially just teaching you random theories and formulas that aren't applicable in our current world. And so I had that view about those degrees and like gender studies, all these degrees, which I think are a bit of a waste of time for for no better way to put it. But I thought, okay, physiotherapy, exercise science, law, medicine, these are, respectable degrees where you need to go to university to practice these. So surely, the curriculum they've set up at these universities is up to date, and they're going to give you a good education that when you graduate, you will be able to be a good practicing athletic therapist or be a good practicing physiotherapist. And it came at a bit of a shock that that's not the case. And it's really up to me if I want to be the best physio in the world, or if I want to be the best athletic therapist in the world, then I essentially can't rely on university. I have to do all my research on the side, which I have been doing to a certain extent from a young age, because I've always been passionate about the human body and especially how it relates to athletics. But just a quick story. So I don't know if you know my study habits. You were never really involved in school. I don't think I ever got one question from you about my grades. Never. And the joke of the family is that when my sister went to university, when Faye went to university, I think she was there for a year. Someone came up to you and like asked you what she's studying. And I don't even think it was before she was applying or something like that. And you didn't even know. You always gave us this freedom with school, and I think we did a good job in upholding our responsibilities. Although I may think that the system has failed, I think it's pointless to be in the system and complain. So I think you need to figure out a way to, if you're in the system, okay, how do I beat the system? How do I extract the most value out of it? So for me, I'm just seeking to get my license so I can practice. So anyways, if you know my study habits, but I'm taking a course now, which is Introduction to Exercise Science. It's just a basic first year course. And I read through the syllabus. I wanted to see what was the class about. So this was in the first week. And it seemed pretty interesting. It was, talking about VO2 max. How do we calculate your VO2 max using open circuit spirometry on a treadmill, which is just when you see people hooked up to that thing, that's what it is. Or how do we estimate it from a sub VO2 max? So now they're using regression equations because it's expensive to use all these expensive equipment like the open circuit spirometry. And so it's not feasible for the general public to figure out their VO2 max. But you can get a pretty good idea of it from, let's say, getting them on a treadmill and using the speed on their treadmill and their heart rate, for example, to estimate their VO2 max. So I thought, okay, this course seems really interesting. I'm actually going to learn some cool, useful things. And so I went to class for the first week. Seemed pretty interesting. And I'm sitting in the lecture and I'm expecting the professor at least to give some sort of introduction to the class. Here's a general overview of the class, and here's why this content is important for you. Like, everyone in the room is studying kinesiology or exercise science. We all want to practice in the field, and it's a specialized program. So I was expecting some sort of introduction along the lines of, I've worked a career as an exercise scientist for 20 years, and here's how the information that I'm going to give you is going to apply in your future career. And I think that would have, given us the motivation to actually want to learn the content, because we would see how it's applicable. But I'm not even kidding. I walk into the class. It's the first week. Usually the first week they don't even do anything. They just read the syllabus, and it's known as a joke. I get into class and I was late as always, which I am to class. He just has the first slide open and he just starts reading off the slide, and like no introduction, nothing whatsoever. And it was basically like everyone's already panicking, taking notes, because we're like, okay, everything that's coming out of his mouth, I need to memorize, even if it's completely irrelevant to how it's going to help us. we have to sit down and write it down. And I'm just looking around the state of people, complete, like, so anxious, writing down everything he's saying, his family history, and I was like, okay, this is a complete joke. So I stopped going to class for 3 to 4 weeks. And like you, I have a good memory. And I also think I have a slightly photographic memory. So I trust my ability to study 3 days before the exam and still get a good grade. So I opened my, this was yesterday, I opened my computer, and he's basically posted this thing where he has everything that you need to memorize for the test. Like all the specific questions, and I'm not even kidding, it was a Word document that was maybe 50 pages long with one line questions. And to give you an example of just how irrelevant some of the questions were, it was memorize. It was, yeah, you need to know for the multiple, it's a multiple choice exam. So we're not even testing our ability to use this knowledge and, let's say write something about it. No, it's just a multiple choice. You need to memorize the top 10 causes of death in the US and Canada from 2019 up until now. So each year you need to know what was number 7. Like was it a stroke that was the cause of this number 7 cause of death in the US, or was it lower respiratory disease? And I was just thinking, that's so pointless. Like if I ever need to use that data, which I can't really see myself doing, why can't I just have the tables in front of me? I had this table in front of me and I'm memorizing it for what if I can just have the table in front of me when I need it? So yeah, that was a bit of a tangent, but it's honestly frustrating that this is what universities come to. And yeah, so I just wanted to hear from you. Do you have any similar experiences? I know you've always been against choosing university from the name, and I really think that I'm very grateful that you instilled that in me, because a lot of people choose universities just because it's a prestigious name and not for the education. And because you're a recruiter, most recruiters, like, they don't care if you got a 4.0 GPA. They don't care that you went to McGill over Concordia. They want to know, are you a competent individual who's suited for this job? So can you just give us your experience in university and any stories you want to share from that?
Yeah, university, I think there's something going on with the rankings, which are somehow given a tremendous amount of importance. So when students are choosing, where should I go? And how those rankings connect with how good that university actually is to prepare you for life, I don't see that strong connection. I think there's a strong connection between those rankings and things like research budgets. So maybe for specific majors, if you're going to get into universities that have large grants, top research, again, same with the curriculum. On a tangent, this is a bit like museums. I have two museums nearby. One which I went to when I was very young. It was the converted house of one of the rulers of the city, and they basically took this. It's a small house, traditional Bedouin or house for this type of climate. Wind towers and a big courtyard in the middle, and just sort of 4 walls and rooms, along the side. But they dug underneath this old house and turned it into a museum and put rooms. And I remember, we'd walk into a room. Even now, this is This is maybe 35 years later, and I still remember it so clearly. Room number 1 was the market. So you walk into this room, it's super narrow. You've got stalls, all along on the left and right, and you've got these life-size mannequins. So sort of the pearl trader, the spice seller, the lady selling maybe fruits and vegetables, the old guy selling whatever. And it's just that walking through this with all the sounds, they had these recordings going on, and so you could hear them pushing their wares and, buy my vegetables or buy my pearls or whatever it is. And I will never forget, what that market feels and looks like. That was an immersive experience, and it really put me in the market from, let's say, 70, 80 years ago. And then the next room was the desert room. So all of a sudden it's pitch black, it's really cold, they've got the AC going really high, there's a tent, there's a crackling fire, there are a few people sitting around the fire drinking coffee, there's a goat, and they've got all the sounds going on, and then stars in the ceiling. So it's you literally feel like you're in the desert at night, and so you're discovering what Bedouin culture looks like in the desert. And then the third room, the last one, was painted completely in blue. Where you're walking is actually so in the ceiling, you've got the bottom of a traditional wooden dhow, which is the ship that they use in this part of the world. So you're looking up at the ceiling as if you're underwater, you're scuba diving basically, and you've got the hull of the boat sort of sticking out of the ceiling, and there's a cable, and there's an upside down pearl diver with a clip on his nose in his loincloth, reaching out to pearls that are on the seabed, and where you're standing is on the seabed, and you're amongst sort of the fish, etc. So it puts you into what is pearl diving in a few seconds, and that was a very big part of the culture over here. This was not a super expensive museum, but it just was a phenomenal experience. Many years later, this spectacular museum with, I think it was a $300 million budget, very, very well-renowned name that came to Dubai, or it came to the UAE, not to Dubai. And I remember, we went on a trip. We stayed in a hotel next to the museum. And this is a big deal. We took the whole family. You guys were with us. And we were 3 or 4 families together. My parents came as well. And the building is just magnificent, like this stunning structure, etc. And we walked in, and I remember they gave us headsets. So I thought, great, the technology is starting. It's going to be this really cool experience. And we go into room 1, and then room 2, and room 3, and room after room after room. It's basically artifacts. So let's say this is the Greek era, and here's a coin from the Greek era, and then a bunch of text around that, like what this coin was and who minted it. And then it was the shield from some soldier, and so a piece of this and a piece of that, and all from an archaeological, historical perspective, I'm sure super valuable artifacts that were very difficult to find. But I think, like the second room in, I just started to really get bored. It's just too much info. There's no experience. It's just a bunch of stuff. And the reason this whole story is basically, I was thinking, who is this working for? This is working for a historian, an archaeologist, someone who already knows a lot and is really looking specifically at this piece after the other piece after the other piece, and where was it found and what did it represent, etc. But for 99% of the people, I think the first experience works far better, So if I'm in this market, and then at the end you show me, by the way, like that was a replica, but here's a real coin from that era. Excellent. Like I've visualized the market. I kind of understood a bit about what's going on, and then you give me some info, some artifacts. That kind of makes sense, right? But just the artifact after artifact, right? So which museum serves its purpose better? I definitely think the first one. And I think university is a bit like that as well. It's designed for certain very specific majors. Like I said, typically people going into research, very academic, but not for the vast majority of work, or definitely not for entrepreneurial work, and not for an entrepreneurial attitude, even if you're working in a company, in terms of doing your own thing, being creative, problem solving, and being practical. So the practical experience, the applicability of what we learn in university, I think is a major issue. University as such, for this period, I mean, and by the way, if we do visualize how things could look, it might not, just like those two museums at first glance, might not look tremendously different, right? They're a museum, you walk in, you go from chamber to chamber, right? But small, what you prioritize can really make a huge difference. And so universities, if we again go back to first principles thinking, what's the point? The point is, in this journey of, hey, young person, as you are preparing and should have probably already started contributing, you shouldn't wait until you're 22 to start discovering what it means to what the value of money is, or to make earn some money and do some work, right? These things we used to, before this system of sitting in school for 8 hours a day, kids used to contribute at home. They would, work on the farm, work in the shop, and learn these practical skills. And education sat on the side. So when that happened, education could be very theoretical. It was a small part of things, but it over time morphed into the entire, the time spent by students, and the whole practical bit kind of fell away. And some systems are trying to bring it back through this idea of project-based learning, but they're not putting it at the core. It's sort of trying to stuff it into the sides, and it's just more of a burden on the students. So we can talk more about that later. But in this journey of, hey, young person, as you continue to prepare for your journey. What will I do? What will my purpose be? What will my contribution be? What will I do? This age, around 18 to 24, is really, it's the right age. So university is targeting students at that right age when they're typically thinking about this question, what will I do? Versus in the teenagers between roughly 13 to 18, you're thinking more of who am I, and I'm not like my parents, and that's why the teenagers can be a little bit rebellious. I need to define who I am, and my peer group is super important. I start and then you go to university, and really it's this idea of what will I do, what will my contribution be, and also finding like-minded people. Whereas before, your peer group was whoever was around you. Maybe you had a few choices, but in university, in a much bigger setting, you're typically now zooming in on this particular club or these particular people, hopefully, if university is working for you. So there are some good things in working today in university. They tend not to be the things we go to, we think about. They're on the side, and we have to bring them into the core. So just a small example. Your sister called me once, like you said, that I purposefully downplayed the whole grade thing because school does a fantastic job of making it seem like it's so important. What grade did you get, and what's your rank, and who's better at this or that. And I knew what you were gonna face later on in life. I'd already been there, so I didn't want to add to that. So I purposefully downplayed this whole story, not asking you, what grades did you get. And if you guys ever came and were like really excited about a certain grade, I'd be like, great, good for you. Your work got you something, so I'm trying to connect it back to you and not make a big deal about it, because anyway, you're gonna work is gonna do that for you once you get to work, and nobody cares, what grade you got, or that you got a certain exam at age 17, not at age 18, right? And certainly not the entrepreneurial world. Like, it's ruthless, right? So she'd been in university for a few months, and we were in touch on WhatsApp and calls, and she calls me once and says, can I chat? Sends me a message, and so we get on a chat. And she says, I have this midterm to study for, and I was supposed to study yesterday, but I bumped into this other student who I had met during the Frosh week, partying and hadn't seen her, and then we kind of bumped into each other a few times. And then yesterday, this other student decided, listen, I need to get to know you. Your story seems so interesting. You're Palestinian, German, blonde, but raised in Dubai, Middle Eastern, living in Canada. We need to talk. I want to understand you. I want to understand your story. And so she says, we spoke, and we ended up speaking. We had a coffee and ended up speaking all night, getting to know each other and having this fantastic conversation. I didn't study for the midterm. I said, this is why I sent you to university. It's for that, not for, don't worry about the midterm, but that's the experience that matters. So when we think about what university isn't doing, it will still, whatever shape and form it takes, it is the right age group for that question. It's when typically students are asking themselves that question. It's the right time to mingle with big groups of people, maybe physically and also remotely. You should be connecting with like-minded people all around the world. That's the bit where, we're starting to figure this stuff out. Everyone's figuring it out except the universities themselves, or at least the ones that are still making the decisions. There might be certain professors, students, groups that are pushing new things, but under the current system, and there are many reasons we can talk about why things don't change. It hasn't moved yet as fast as the world has, and what students really are asking for and what they need.
Time you share that story about Faye, it reminds me of that time you had a speaker come to your nursery, and he shared the story. Correct me if I mess up any of the details, but he was in school. He was sharing about how when he was in school, his dad came up to him once and asked him to go camping, and he was like, no, I can't. I can't miss school. I have X, Y, and Z, these academic responsibilities. I have an exam, whatever. And he goes, son, never let school get in the way of your education. And I thought that was fantastic, like such a cool quote.
And that's Dr. Noah Rafford, and that's who is a Montessori student, who was a father at our school. And he was in a Montessori school, a very progressive school. He's doing real project-based learning. And despite that, his dad feels like, two nights up in the mountains of Colorado, fishing and camping is as important, if not more important than, whatever he's doing between the four walls of his school.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, before we transition from university to high school and then nursery, I just want to share one personal story. So a lot of people, so going back to grade 12 when we're applying to universities, everyone's saying, okay, even if the degree isn't good, university is really important because it's gonna be an opportunity to network with a bunch of students. And I was thinking, okay, yeah, that sounds cool, but still is not justifying why you're paying, $40,000 to go network with people. So I trusted them. And then I went to university. I did my first year in Queens, for those of you that don't know me, which is in Kingston, Ontario. And so the first year passes by, and it was pretty much what I was expecting from first year university. I was living in the dorms. It was a bit of a party school, and I chose it on purpose because I wanted to experience what university was like in a college town. So Concordia, you can pretty much see it from here. It's just smack in the middle of downtown. It's a tall building. You don't get that immersive college experience. So I chose Queens, which is in Kingston, which is, I like to think, I know you guys like it. After I've been there for a year, it's a bit of I think it's a shithole, which might be unfair, but that's another rabbit hole that we can go down. But really, Kingston was just about Queens. Anyone that goes there will tell you, like, no one chooses to go to Queens because of the city. There's nothing. There's like 2 streets, bunch of homeless people, bunch of crackheads everywhere. But we go there because of the school. So it kind of feels like a boarding school, almost, is how I can describe it. So anyways, the first year passes by, made a lot of cool friends. We hung out a lot. We played sports. We did party, which was fun, and that's what I wanted out of my first year. But nothing too. When I think of networking, I'm thinking, okay, how can we create value in the future? How can we maybe set up a business? Or I'm looking to set up a business in 3 or 4 years. What do you think about my business plan? Do you have any advice for me? That's what I think about, networking, not having a beer on a Sunday night. But anyways, the first year passes, and then I go back to school. So I worked in the summer, and I'm going to talk about that on a different podcast. I did the student works management program. So I essentially opened my own painting franchise from scratch. And that was an amazing experience. And I was essentially living in the real world. I was doing door to door for 3 hours a day at the start, and then reduced to like an hour. And I was dealing with real clients, dealing with money, dealing with tax, dealing with employees, which was a complete headache. So after going through that entire experience, I think it made me more of a man. And I finished that experience, and then I'm going back to university, and it's about the first weekend, and I've transitioned out of that party phase of first year, and I'm thinking, okay, now it's time to make use of university, extract as much as possible from it, join clubs, and let's start my career in physiotherapy. So anyways, it's the first or second weekend, and then my friends come up to me, and they're like, let's start planning for HOCO. I just look at them, I'm like, what? You guys are actually planning on doing all those street parties and all those bullshit parties again for an entire second year? And I realized right there we were on completely different paths. They just looked at university as, okay, I'm going to go to class, try and pass, and then I'm going to try and have as much fun as possible on the side, party, and just get drunk every weekend. And I was in Kingston, so it was suffocating. Like, it's not like I can go meet other people who aren't in Queens. It's only students at Queens. You walk around downtown, and you just see people from the school. So it was suffocating, and I maybe didn't completely realize why I felt suffocated at the time. But when I feel suffocated, I immediately have to leave. So before I even told you guys, I started researching, okay, transferring. How can I get out of Kingston? Let me see. Can I go to Europe? Are the transfer credits better if I apply to Germany? And so I ended up applying to Concordia and McGill. And yeah, I ended up choosing Concordia. And funny story about McGill, actually, while we're on this topic. I know I'm going on rants, but I was still in Kingston, still at Queen's. I came for the weekend to go and visit Concordia and McGill. So, and for the people listening who don't know much about either of those universities, in Canada, or I don't even want to say in Canada, internationally, McGill is regarded as more of the prestigious university. So it's not the equivalent of Harvard, but let's just call it Harvard. And then the other one, Concordia, is maybe not like a state college, but something below Harvard. Okay, that's how they're viewed internationally. Here, I would actually say that's not necessarily the case, because people are starting to wake up and realize that the name of the university doesn't really matter. It's more about the education. And so I walk into the Concordia building, and it's modern, it's well renovated, and the facilities look good. And I walk into one of the offices, and I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just walking in, and there was just a lady having a chat with one of her coworkers, and I had walked into the wrong office, and I was like, "Oh, sorry, sorry, I didn't mean to walk in here. I thought it was the undergraduate admissions or something like that, where they can give you a tour." And she was like, "Oh, no worries. Where are you visiting from?" And I told her, "Yeah, I'm at Queen's, but I'm looking to transfer to Concordia." She was like, "Oh, that's so wonderful. Let me give you a tour." And so she took time out of her day to just give me a tour, help me out with my admissions. She wasn't even an admissions officer, and she offered to help me go through my file because I had some questions about transfer credits, and it's so overwhelming for anyone that's looking to transfer. There's so many documents, so much bullshit you have to read through, and she took the time out of her day to help me out with that. On the other hand, the next day, I have this good impression of Concordia. The next day, I go to visit McGill. So it's a long walk from here. It's around 30 minutes, maybe more, honestly. So there was this huge uphill, especially the kinesiology building. It's like pretty much the farthest building from here. It's where, for those of you that did the McGill sports camp, that's the building. So I go, and I walk in, and then it says the undergraduate office and stuff. So I walk in, and I'm sitting. There's people at their office, and they're typing on their computer. I sit down in one of the waiting chairs, and they can see me, and they basically just ignore me. I'm sitting there for 10, 15, 20 minutes. No one says anything. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go up. This is crazy. I've been sitting down here. There's no one else around. It's just me, and they haven't even acknowledged my presence. So I go up to her. She was typing like this. She just stops and looks at me, and she goes like, "Yes, like what do you want?" And I was like, I came all the way from Kingston, and I was just wondering if I can get a really quick tour, just like 10, 15 minutes. I just want to see what the facilities look like, and I also just had a couple questions about my admissions. And she just goes, "Sorry, we don't do tours at this time. You can go on the website and book some virtual tour." And I was shocked. Like I genuinely couldn't believe it, and I was pissed. So I ended up asking to speak with her supervisor, and then they ended up giving me a short tour. But it just showed like they have this entitlement, which I detested. I hated how they were snobby, and so I just knew I couldn't go to that school. There's no way I'm putting myself in that building. Although it is tempting, the name McGill, you tell people, "Oh, I got accepted into McGill and Concordia, but I chose Concordia," and they look at you like you're crazy. And by the way, the facilities were basically like degrading. It hasn't been renovated since I've been there. I went to McGill sports camp when I was like 7, and even then the facilities were extremely old. Nothing has changed. Nothing. It's anyone who is in that program will tell you how bad the facilities are. And so yeah, that's how that's how I chose Concordia. So small rant. Did you have anything to add on to that before we move on to nurseries? You're muted. Yeah.
So yeah, there was some background sound here. Just two things to add. If your experience there was related to McGill being just super efficient, we've already got a process and you have to follow that process, and that's why they couldn't give you a tour on the spot, I think that would be fine. You could say, look, they're a very well-oiled machine, etc.
Exactly.
But I imagine that if we scratch underneath the surface a bit, the reason that there's that difference is McGill has this sense of we're already good, and the very fact that you're in this university is already enough, and sort of they're resting on their laurels, they're resting on their history, versus really trying to make an effort. And of course, I'm generalizing. I'm sure there are pockets here and there, professors, etc. But generally, and they would be the rebels really within that system. Generally, the attitude is not, how do we help you succeed? Whereas universities like Concordia that do not depend on this, or do not have the luxury of depending on this reputation, this ranking, etc., their mindset, the attitude of the university tends to be very different, which is, we're here to actually help you. We're here to serve, your needs and to get you to a better place. And I think that's where they're heading in the right direction in terms of universities, which is, let's remember what our purpose is, and the purpose should be, and the KPIs and the results should be, are we helping those students? Did they end up getting better jobs, succeed at work? Do they come back and go, thank you very much, or not? And then we adjust, right? So just a quick one on Concordia versus McGill. I think this applies to many universities in those positions. One is where they have these accolades, this ranking, and then the others that are, I call them the tier 2, that try harder and typically end up preparing students better. I remember one of my courses, comparing notes with friends, because the two universities are almost side by side in the same city. So a lot of friends, we had a lot of friends from different campuses, from the different universities. And when I compared notes with friends, I had a friend who was studying industrial engineering. What are you up to? Oh, I'm downtown, studying a building, working on this project. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. I'm stuck studying for midterms and doing assignments. I'm on my desk, literally, and we're both engineers, but they seem to have a lot more practical experience, opportunities at Concordia. And then one story I remember, I think it was I was doing a minor in management, and in one of the courses we actually had the same book. So I'm comparing notes with friends, and literally the same course, the same book, and we said, so how far did you get? And in our 3 months in McGill, we got, I don't know, to chapter 30, let's say, and they only got to chapter 20. And so we were like, oh, what do you think is going on? And they said, well, I think it's because the professor actually checks after every chapter to make sure that everybody got it. And if they didn't, or if at least a significant part of the class didn't, they would then go back, and they wanted to make sure. So they were going more slowly, trying to make sure that everybody really understood the topics. And I thought that was very telling, because for McGill, it was, there's no time to stop, we just go. But the understanding, I'd rather have 20 chapters well understood as a foundation, and then I can go and cover the others in another course or by myself, rather than have 30, 40 chapters shallowly understood, memorized for a midterm, and forgotten 2 weeks later, right? So I think there's that. And then just generally speaking around universities, before we move on, in terms of what they could look like, if they looked a lot like the current universities, we could spend some time saying, how do we tweak these things, and this could change here and there. But I do think that there has to be a fundamental shift. Again, it doesn't have to be in actual buildings. Should they get together, 18 to 20-year-olds in this melting pot, big groups, getting to know. Yes, definitely. But what should be the purpose? Just like when you look at Concordia and McGill, you don't really notice. But if the culture is we're here to make sure you succeed, then you're going to get a very different experience, right? So what are those things that we need to change fundamentally? And there are a lot of possibilities out there. This is still very early stages, of different concepts for universities coming up, but I think this is the future. One of the best ones I've seen is basically going back to what's the purpose, right? So the first thing is choosing your major. What a critical question, right? And how many universities actually help you answer that question? You could say it's not their job. It's the high school's job. Someone should be helping with that question. And typically it's very little, some random counselor here and there. So when you put that as part of the fundamental, a fundamental part of the system, you're going to see a very different system around it, right? So the coaching, the counseling, the figuring out your purpose team, right, will be doing a very different job and a lot more in that space. So that's the first thing, is figuring out your purpose. The second thing would be you kind of, based on your purpose, and it could be a profession or it could be some sort of combo of things that doesn't exist, so something that exists or doesn't exist, but for your particular development, that's what you want. You want some sort of, I don't know, martial arts with math. Like, who knows what combo works for you and gets you excited. You would then basically curate and choose what combination of courses that you want. And then around those courses, there's something really important. Universities focus on half of ourselves. One half of us is, what do I do? What will I do? I will do this, I will do that, I will work here, I will work there. There's the I am. They're like, who am I? I'm a human. I've got certain, psychological, emotional intelligences that could be more or less developed. I've got a physical dimension. I could be fit, unfit, nutrition, eating well, not eating well, sleeping well, not sleeping well, etc. I've got a relationship intelligence. How able am I to collaborate, to build relationships, to bond, to understand the dynamic of social interactions. And then I've got, how do I manage resources? How do I manage my time? How do I manage finances? How do I manage my space, optimize my space? Today we spoke a lot about the tools and the mic and the camera, and these are, what space do you work in? So if you imagine a university that covers the entire human, you would be choosing credits in all of these spaces. So in one space, it would be, yes, this is sort of, I think I want to go into this territory, and I've done some work with people to help refine that, and and I might change it, but it's not this random pick a card from a catalog. And yes, I go and do courses as you understand them. I get content is important, definitely. Learning from people who've done it before is critical, but how it's done has to be done differently. But then on the side, I might be taking, a course in emotional intelligence. I might be taking a course in meditation, a course in mindfulness, a course in relationship management. How do I manage conflict? How do I understand what it means to project onto others my insecurities? And you can imagine what a 101 course would look like. Let's take project management. Running a to-do list, running a simple project, running a complex project with resources, running an agile project in a highly dynamic, that could be a level 400 course, managing the basics of understanding the value of money, of, advanced cash flow management, etc. And separately from, I want to do these as a profession, but these are skills that I want, that serve me in anything that I end up doing. So that starts to give you an idea. And I saw this one university that said, a university of the future, $3,000 tuition. You don't need to travel. We don't have a fancy campus. We didn't invest money, and you shouldn't invest money in a fancy campus. You can connect once you've chosen your courses. You can connect with some of the best people on the planet remotely around those topics. And if you've got money to spare, rather use that money to go and travel to find like-minded peers and start building your tribe. So you're getting started with podcasts. It would be great to meet other young people that are starting their podcasts as well. And what are they doing? And what are you learning? And that you can exchange with them. Maybe have also a mentor who's done this for a long time, etc. That would be one of your tribes. Another one of your tribes is your soccer group. Another one is, your could be your skiing group or your whatever. So these concepts are going to start emerging, and the nothing will stop it, because at the end, both the students and the people who receive these students at work, or whether it's your own business, everybody except the universities is realizing that something is wrong, and then there's a better way of doing this, and it will come. And there are a few reasons we can talk about why it's taking more time than other industries. But that gives you a glimpse of the kind of stuff that could emerge with universities of the future.
Yeah, well said. I know I can sense your ambition in terms of what universities could look like, and I think it's really cool to think about. As you said, the physical dimension is completely ignored. No one ever comes up when your level of fitness is never assessed at university, and I think that would be really cool and beneficial to society. If everyone was healthier, healthcare costs would go down, and it would just be a pro for society. Before I move on, I realized that you reminded me that I didn't finish my point about the networking. If anyone's currently in high school and they're applying to university, this might apply to you, so I thought I would just share it. If you're looking to use university as a networking experience, I think that's great, and I think part of university is about the networking. But I think it's important to always just keep in mind the demographic of the people in your university. And usually what you're going to find is that when you get there, you're going to have to put in a lot more work to find people who have similar ambitions as you, or who are just ambitious in general. And so just keep that in mind. It's not going to be hard. Everyone around you is usually not going to be very hardworking, disciplined, ambitious people. You're going to find some crackheads, and you're going to find some people just smoking weed in their dorm room all day. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And yeah, just keep that in mind. So we've covered universities and their...
Can I just comment on that?
Go for it.
I think, that does fit squarely into the story, into this discussion. There's a reason why there's a lot of escapism and a lot of, let's say, dysfunctional distraction in all its forms and shapes and sizes. There's something about humans, you can't take evolution out of a human. We're evolving. The impulse is there. If you just imagine the Big Bang started, and that is going to continue just expanding. And the question, though, is, will you let evolution flow in a functional way, or otherwise it will come? It will come out in a dysfunctional way, right? So you've got to imagine this evolutionary impulse is like the water from the municipality. It's coming. It's coming into your apartment. It's coming to your home. The question is, are your pipes all tangled up? Are you ready, for the flow, or is it leaking? And do you have, drainage here and leaks and floods and things like that? Or have you prepared yourself so that energy, that evolution impulse flows in the right way? So if you imagine, we're talking about university, but if you've been through these systems for, 10 years, 13, 14 years, the frustration, remember in the last discussion, this thing about pushing down what you'd really like to do in order to sit through these classes and just memorize and regurgitate and memorize and regurgitate and not understand what's the point. Many people deal with that by just saying, okay, I'm going to have to go through that and let me numb myself outside of those four walls to be able to cope. Otherwise, I'll go crazy. Gabor Mate has a really nice statement around. He dealt with addictions, all forms of addictions, but including hardcore ones. And one of the techniques he recommends for detaching from addictions, because they're very hard to detach from. It's not a question of knowing. Most people know they'd like to. It's how do you actually do it? And for him, the first step is recognize what that addiction was helping with. Be grateful for what it was that it helped you avoid. So if you were a cocaine addict, maybe your life was so difficult, the trauma was so hard that this prevented you from committing suicide. So thank you, cocaine, for preventing me from committing suicide. Or maybe it prevented you from hurting or others or doing, and that's so every form of these distractions usually has a reason. And I think when it comes to students, when you're bombarded with all this, these 8 hours a day through elementary school, middle school, high school, into university, no purpose. It's just this mind-numbing, most of the time, experience. The attraction to then forgetting about it and escaping it is very, very high. Especially at a period when you want to, of course, connect with others. And there's nothing wrong with partying and having fun, but there is a difference when you are using it as a tool to escape the fact that you're not happy with what's happening. So if you're not doing anything about that, then that's what this is serving. And the other way, the more functional way, is to actually look at that and try to do something about it, which is what all this whole discussion is about. And then, of course, distraction, fun, escapism is a part of our lives. It's a way of, changing our thoughts, taking a break, but coming back to something, taking a break, taking a holiday to refresh your thoughts. My mom had this beautiful expression that marked me a lot when I was young. And she would say, I take a vacation, and you can see this in any entrepreneur. The relationship with vacations and with tools and gadgets is always in relation to, they help me I have a purpose, I love what I do, I have a passion, and these things help me do those things better. So I take a vacation, and she would say, I'd come back from vacation and I've got dozens of new ideas. By stepping away from the school and from work and taking that break, she would come back refreshed. Or she's got this, I want to buy this really special pen or this iPad because they help me, express and run my projects better. And that's an entrepreneur, someone who uses those tools with awareness to help something that they're doing. And I think a lot of these students are suffering from just this terrible system, and then having to numb themselves until hopefully more of them figure out that that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I think what you said about the vacations is true, and actually, I can relate with that. Growing up, we traveled a lot, which I'm very thankful for, and we had amazing experiences, traveling the world. I'd say it started a couple of years ago, maybe when I was 18, when we would go on summer break, and I was just spending my entire summer on vacation, and something in me was just not satisfied with my current state. I wasn't enjoying the vacation. I couldn't sit down and relax. and I was trying to think why. It's because I wasn't working on anything. I didn't have a purpose yet. I wasn't working on my mission, and so just taking a vacation felt completely pointless. It wasn't like, okay, I'm taking a break from pursuing this career, pursuing this mission currently in my life. It was just, I'm just relaxing for no reason. I didn't feel like I had deserved it. It wasn't my money that I was paying. I wasn't funding my own vacation. I hadn't, worked extremely hard. I was in school, but I hadn't worked extremely hard, and I didn't feel like I earned it. And so yeah, I kind of felt empty sometimes on those vacations, but nonetheless still enjoyed them. I think what you said also about the evolution, and it's gonna come no matter what. I think that's brilliant, and I want to tie that into the next section, which we'll talk about, which is high schools. Something, just a small observation that I want to make about high schools. I had a good experience in high school and middle school and elementary school. I went to I Although there are some things I can nitpick about, the curriculum, I think I went to a great school. The teachers were happy. I had a good social life in school. But something that an observation I always made is, I know you know this, that ADHD cases are just spiking. Like what? And if you step back and you think why, like all of a sudden, why are more kids getting ADHD? If it's genetic, why is this mental illness just spiking? And then you have to think, okay, if kids are being forced to sit down in a chair, be silent, obey the system, stand up straight, you can't lean back on your chair, you can't rest your head, you can't do that. You have to conform to this way that they want you to be. You can't self-express. There's no self-expression. Obviously, they're gonna get agitated, and it's obvious that their attention span is gonna be low, and I think it's correlated, and that's correlated with why all of a sudden these ADHD cases are spiking. So what are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, specifically on ADHD, I have a little exercise I do with parents. You hear again in this traditional schooling system, which is very reliant on memory and regurgitation. By the way, I call that like the in soccer, that would be the equivalent of learning how to juggle a ball. So, I can juggle the ball 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, okay, on my knee, on my shoulder, on my, head, etc. And it takes a lot of work. But it's a very, very, very narrow slice of the life, of a soccer player. Same thing in tennis. If I mastered, the the drop volley at the perfect slice shot, but then you've got the backhand, and you've got the smash, and you've got the forehand from the baseline, and the backhand from the baseline, and the serve, the first serve, second serve, right? So a tennis game and strategy and fitness. And so school is really working this one muscle and ignoring all the other things. And in the case of juggling, you might even say it's a useless muscle when you actually get on the soccer field. Like, who cares how well you juggle the ball? Again, unless you're using it to build your skills on the field. So on the ADHD specifically, I will hear stories like, oh, my first child is doing well. They're a good student, but my second isn't. And so we'll explore that a little bit. And the types of stories I'll hear will be like, he's not interested or she's not interested in they don't get good grades. They're not good students. And so I'll try to veer the conversation to what are they interested in, and some examples will be, like, what do you mean? Just ignore academics for a second. What do they like? Well, this boy loves soccer, for example. Okay. can he, like if you asked him to name, like, what's his favorite team, let's say Arsenal, can he name all the players on the team? Are you kidding? He can name all the players and the subs, maybe even the junior team this year and the last 5 years, and he can do that for, you know, most of the top Premier League teams. So this child doesn't have a memory problem. They have an interest issue. They're not interested in what's going on at school. The intelligence is there, you know. It's just they're not interested. And the other example is, if you give me your, you know, least preferred subject, and I put you in a cinema, you know, hall where this was playing 8 hours a day, it's the most. But let's you know, imagine a topic that you really find very boring, given in a very boring way. And day 1 and day 2 and day 3, and then, you know, you break out and, you know, I can't take this anymore, and we'll say, oh, you have an attention problem. You don't have an attention problem. It's, you know, it's not normal to sit in that chair and not wanna break free. So I think the issues, there are many reasons why, and Ken Robinson has a great story about this, how the lady who ended up producing Cats, the one of the most successful, I don't know if she produced all of Cats or just the dance, the choreographer for Cats, one of the most successful musicals of all time, who herself before that was a champion a ballet dancer, in school, was actually kicked out of school. They just called her mom and said, this child is disrupting every other student. You need to, you know, it's not only affecting her, it's affecting the others. You need to take her to see a psychiatrist. And so she goes to see the psychiatrist, and he asks her a few questions. She answers them. The girl's in the background, and he says, give, let's do something. And he takes the mom out of the room, and there's a two-way glass where they can see what's going on. And he says to the girl, I'm just going to take your mom out for a few minutes. You know, we'll be back soon. And he plays, I think he had one of these roll-up little piano or instruments, you know, that starts playing music. And he steps out with the mom, and he says, let's see what happens. And the girl just gets up and starts dancing. So he looks at the mom and says, there's nothing wrong with your daughter. She just loves to move. So take her to a dance school. And what this lady ended up remembering, she goes, she put me in a dance school where I had academics, you know, but I was learning. First of all, I met people, they allowed me to move. I met others who love to move. I discovered I've discovered tap dancing and ballet and, you know, all kinds of dancing. And so there's nothing wrong with the child. Today, that same child would be given Ritalin and suppressed, basically, and just numbed into going through this system, right? And the other things, I think, also what's aggravating the situation is food. So shortcuts in food and generally in dopamine. So exposing children to screens where they're getting rapid and high doses of dopamine, and then the sugar as well, and then expecting them to sit still in a classroom is worse than if you imagine, you know, 50 years ago when there wasn't so much refined sugar and there wasn't so much exposure to dopamine, you know, with screens, and kids just moved more. So it's a symptom of many different things, and it's just coming to a head now, I guess. Before we talk, you know, or as we talk about the different ages, it just came to me that maybe it would be a good idea just to kind of paint a picture back to the preparing young people for life, so that it sets the scene for what should these systems look like. So we spoke a little bit about the 18 to 24. You know, what's the key dynamic? But if we go all the way back and we just start from the beginning, you know, we all go through these psychological stages of development. And the reason they're stages is because for certain periods of time, the core need is quite common amongst most people, and it is there are patterns for at which ages it happens, right? It's not an on-off switch, obviously. So when we say teenagers, it doesn't mean that on your 13th birthday you suddenly become interested in X, but the chances are, that peer pressure and wanting to be like peers is much stronger at age 13, 14 than it is at age 6 or 7, right? Those are just empirical patterns, empirically observable patterns of humans. So what are those core dynamics? The very first one is, do I matter? So you're born, you are literally and physically fused. You're one with your mother. You are like, you have 5 fingers, and then there's an umbilical cord to another one. It's a child is a part of their mom's body. And whilst, yes, you physically separate, emotionally, both for the mom and child, they're still fused emotionally, and it takes a long time, and it's a very important. There's a reason why that's there. It's to be able to care for that baby and nurture them and sacrifice so much, of your own time and health and to care for this child. But one of the key dynamics going on in the first few years of life, roughly the first 3 years, is, do I matter? And so the more we can nurture a child with, yes, you matter, and you have an identity. And why do we say the terrible twos? Because children say, they say no all the time. It's because they want to experience their ability to say, I want to choose my socks. So they're expressing their desire for freedom and autonomy in that way. And if we don't give them that space, then you get the terrible twos. So if you see how these stages evolve, then you think of what parents can do. If they're aware of those stages, they would behave and parent differently, knowing that those stages, what do they mean, and how to, and what's coming next. And then the same thing for schools. So those 3 things really need to run side by side. So it's, do I matter? And with this confidence of, yes, I do matter, I got, the love, etc. The next is that starts to flow in, and that question continues, the do I matter your whole life. But what then comes online is, I want to make my own, things, right? I want to be responsible. I want to make my sandwich. I want to do this. And to the extent that you're given those opportunities or not, things go well or don't. And then as you get to roughly around, so that's the 3 to 6 period. And then as you get to the 6 to 12, and you're starting to look at, now we're talking about elementary school, there's this into middle school, there's this, what is the world about? There's a sort of a stability in terms of who I am if things have gone well. And then there's this desire to get to know. And this is where the 20 questions go. Why? And I remember your sister once in the car, there's the sun, or something, like, why is it gone? Well, because the earth, rotates to the other side of the sun. Why? Because, and at the 20th question, she just kind of like got satisfied, and moved on. And that was a challenge for me, because I wanted to stay with those 20 questions while I was driving. But that's the period when kids want to discover how stuff works. There's this curiosity, there's this desire to do things in groups, etc. And then you hit the teenage years, and there's this, from the cocoon of the parents, again, if things are going well, where you really you look up to your parents, they're everything, they've done everything, they're always right, etc. You start to find that, that's not necessarily the case. And what's emerging there is, who am I? And one of the first answers to that question is, I'm not my parents, which is true, and that's why you tend to focus on how you're different from your parents. And to the extent that your parents realize that and give you space, while keeping an eye on the big picture, and it can be a very rebellious stage or not. And the next then stage is what will I do? What is my purpose? What will my contribution be? What am I going to do in my life? So do I matter? Can I do things on my own? What is the world about? Who am I? And then putting those two things together. Who am I in this world? What will I do in this world? And so if you look at schools, that's really what they should be mapping to and optimizing for, and doing that hand in hand with the parents. So yeah, so moving into we're rolling back now into high school, and high school. When you look at that space, really the types of things we should be looking at is a lot of, what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? Where do you want to put your time? Who are you? Type of thing, and also, which is absent from today's high schools, is there should be a lot of dipping your toes into the real world, into work, doing your projects. So education shouldn't be this sort of 20 years in a classroom and then we throw you out into the world of work. It should just gradually increase so that it almost becomes seamless. It starts off, 20% of your time, 34%, and eventually you just make that. And then the learning bit continues, right? So in 10 years, you'll be taking a course on how to use AI for kinesiology or whatever it is, right? It will continue, but what will broadly occupy your time is what do I do? And these two things continue. So yeah, so high school, that's, I would say, those are the big questions that high school should be answering and should be preparing students for.
Yeah, nice. Was there anything you wanted to add to the high school section before we move on to nurseries?
Well, so generally, I would say if we were to summarize schools, I would continue that thread. I would work it back down. You hear this term a lot today, which is project-based learning, and I think it's being spoken about, but very few people are really able to put it at the center of the curriculum. So what do I mean by that? Most students today in high school or middle school, you ask them, what do you do? What is school? And they'll just give you their timetable. I do an hour of math, an hour of chemistry, an hour of, math, language, sports, arts, etc. And versus, and then what we try to do is squeeze in. If the school is progressive and they started to see that, hey, this is not working as well as it should, they try and squeeze in these projects somewhere in there. But we spoke about the if the experience is already mind-numbing, we spoke about the students that are trying to numb their way out of it, and then you throw projects on top of it onto them. Like, this is not, it just becomes more burden, more hard work. You're not in the right mindset. How to really make that switch is to put the projects at the center. So actually your timetable should be the way students should answer that question. What do you do at school? I do projects. I do my projects. And just like a YouTube video for you today, informing you about, what's the best mic and camera setup for a podcast, it's a tool that you reach out for to help your project. If you don't have a project and I come to you, like, let's take your next door neighbor could be another student, right? And I want to go and explain to him the importance of 4K versus 1080 at 30 FPS, right? I mean, just because it's Tuesday and that's the lesson I'm going to give him, it's completely useless. He or she has no interest they don't have a project related to that. And so the projects should not be on the side and the periphery. They should be at the center, and we should not be moving until kids are immersed in projects that they're interested in. Once they're interested in those projects, then it becomes it flows naturally to bring in the subject matter, the math and the chemistry and the physics. So what do I mean by that? You in school, whenever, there are a couple of angles to this. Whenever it was rare, as you said, I did not proactively get involved in school other than, coaching the soccer team and cheering for you guys and of course attending parent-teacher conferences. But I mean, we didn't proactively sort of chase you on what grades and what's happening in school. We knew that it was your first, but we made it your responsibility, just like my mom did it for us, and we knew that was better. But those occasional times when you did ask for help, and they were rare. I remember you had a project once, some sort of essay, and you were comparing, if I remember correctly, different forms, different philosophies and political ways of managing society. There was Taoism and I forget the other two or three that you had to compare and contrast, and it was quite critical and urgent, and there was a big test the next day, and you were completely frustrated, and so we had a chat about the playground soccer experience, and soccer in general, because you love soccer. And it was, okay, what happens on the playground when in the morning before the bell rings? What do you like and not like about it? It's totally free. We get to run around. What do you not like about it? Well, some of the kids who don't know how to play or just bigger, they grab the ball and create their own rules and whatever. Okay, so some form of rules are good, yes. So when it's supervised by an adult and there are rules, then it's better. And I remember the conversation went to eventually, it came from you, and you said, ideally, if those adults could just stick around and make sure it doesn't descend into chaos, but we don't want them to tell us which position every child should play, because we know who's the best goalkeeper and who's the best defender and who's the best midfielder and attacker. And so we sort of came to this space of no rules, total chaos, too many rules. I think we were talking about the caste system at that point. So the caste system put rules, but it was completely arbitrary. So this person is at the bottom end of the chain and this other person is at the top end of the chain. And it did create some sort of order. It took them out of the law of the jungle, but it was completely random and arbitrary. And the ideal was to say, let's make sure it doesn't descend into chaos, but have people emerge or play the roles that they're meant to play. So there was the right balance of freedom and rules. And so this whole thing, and then you went and wrote the essay, and I remember your teacher, grabbing me in the corridor saying, your child wrote this fantastic essay. And I said, I have a confession to make. We spoke about it. Like, I actually helped him the night before, and we spoke about this thing. And she said, no, it was clear but he wrote it. It was so evident that he wrote it with full understanding in his own words, and he really got the concepts. So what was that? Basically, what that was at the root, finding a point of interest. If you're not interested, if you're sitting in that classroom and you're not interested, there's no purpose, it's a complete waste of time. Some kids will manufacture that interest, and we spoke about that. They'll create this fictitious interest, which is the grade. So, okay, I'm doing it even though there's no purpose other than to get a grade. And they're just climbing a ladder that eventually, and I used to say this to you guys, this ladder that the world presents to you in the education system, if you do this, you go to the next grade, and if you get this grade, then and if you get a high SAT score and you get into a good university, and if, and then you get to the top of this ladder and you realize there's nothing there. There's no work out there saying, wow, fantastic. You climbed that ladder so well. Here's an easy job, or here's some easy money. It's still, and sometimes that ladder is just on the wrong wall. So, if there has to be a point of interest, a connection with the child, so that the education is useful and purposeful. And then we can, using soccer, I would always use soccer for anything you were stuck on. If I wanted to talk to you about math or finance, I remember we had a chat around football, and what's the size of the football pitch and how do you measure it? And so what's the length? What's the width? And so I was basically talking about math, but you didn't feel it because you're talking about a soccer pitch, which you love. We spoke about clubs, and I remember asking the question once, how does FC Barcelona make money? And can they afford to pay Messi's salary? Yes. Can, Brentford in the Premier League, can they afford to pay Messi? No. Why? What do you think is going on? They make more money. Why? And the whole discussion was around getting you to see how the revenue stream of a football club works. So it is the tickets, but it's also the TV revenue. So we had this fantastic discussion about how football teams make money. The purpose was to talk about generally how revenue streams work and what they mean, and if you have them, what you can afford and not, and why there are different clubs with different amounts of budgets. But the soccer was just the tool for if I was talking to another child who was interested in something else, we'd be talking about something else, but the same questions, right? So with the need identified, what would then happen is on the periphery, you take these 20, 30 students, you've worked with them, and these systems, by the way, I'm referring to exist. And by the way, I'm not a great creator of these systems. I'm just a very good observer, and I can find these things and connect them, connect the dots and see which ones will become bigger and which ones meet the needs of the future more. So all these things I'm referring to are from real life examples, still niche, but they do exist. So once the needs are identified, the project is identified, the purpose is identified, then the peripheral class, the traditional knowledge download lessons become, here's some info, so let's do art. The big movements in art, these are the big, most popular ones, and here's an overview that's age appropriate for whatever age you're at. Now, each of you go back to your projects and design the websites for your project. So you're maybe building a soccer academy. The student next to you is working on an air filtration dome. The one next to you is building some sort of fashion boutique, their dream. And all of you are doing math. All of you are doing art. All of you are doing business. All of you are doing, all these subjects, but they are embedded in your projects. And so they're learned in a purposeful, meaningful way. And guess what? As these projects shift and your interests go from here, this project goes in that direction to this direction, the question later on at age 17, 18 of what will I do becomes a lot easier. You're actually getting ready for that and moving into it seamlessly, rather than this, if you remember the last discussion, this train 300 kilometers an hour, and then suddenly you stop at a station, like, what do you want to do? And you've never practiced this question. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what true project-based learning is. And just for you can start to think of potential risks and downsides. That's the natural thing people think of when we talk about new systems. What are you talking about, and how will it, every child is doing their own thing, and how will you figure that out? You need so many teachers. You actually need less, because the children are engaged and happy. So there's a lot less behavior management. There's a lot less frustration and boredom by the students. So you're not wasting your time with all these detentions, and kids actually enjoy going to school. Right? So you're liberating a lot of resources. Guess what? The staff love it much more. Teachers are way more excited, believe me, to be working with students who are excited about their projects, and where the teacher gets to be a facilitator and to be creative, rather than this is the 20th cycle of I'm teaching chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10 in the same way, every single year, right? So they have their own issues with numbing themselves to get through this, just the drone of the repetitive cycle every year. And the students are getting more difficult because of the things we spoke about. Life is getting more interesting outside and faster. and they're struggling to keep up. And so the gap between the interest and engagement of students is getting greater. So yeah, that's a glimpse into middle school to high school.
Yeah, very well said. I just want to make a small note for any parents listening. When I was in high school and I was observing the people around me, my friends and just also other students in my grade, it was so easy to spot the kids whose parents were really, really strict with them with grades, because they were always just working because they wanted to make their parents happy, or they didn't want to disappoint their parents. And I think it comes with good intent. Like, the parents want their kid to get a good grade because they think that that's the best course that's going to lead them to, the best universities, and that's going to be the best thing for their life. But as a parent, just make sure that your kid understands that at the end of the day, they're doing this for themselves. And it means nothing if your kid goes through the entire education system hating what he or she is doing, but they got a good grade, so they made you happy. That's pointless, right? Most parents just want the best for their kids. So just something to keep in mind. And I think you and my mom did a really great job with that. And I always knew that that getting grades was for myself. And that doesn't mean that if I didn't enjoy a class, I failed it, because I still had that baseline of respect for the fact that you are paying for my education. So I never failed a class, and I won't accept to fail a class, just so that I can repay, because we paid for it, and that doesn't align with my principles. So it doesn't ever have to go to that extreme. But I always understood that everything I'm doing in school is for myself, and I should have the autonomy and the freedom to choose what I want to study later on. Before we go on to nurseries, was there anything you wanted to add? No? Okay, cool. So still focusing on the West, or maybe even, I guess, for nurseries, we can just talk about all of the curriculums. What are things that you observe in those other curriculums that you think need to be improved?
I think it's just a continuation of the same conversation, is understanding what are the needs, what is the purpose, and what are the needs, and how to best meet those needs. Just I did remember something related to what you just brought up around grades, the importance of examinations and tests. I think there's a very important role to play on this journey for assessments. I don't think assessments should disappear at all. But again, if you remember, we speak about when you understand the purpose, you use the tools in a very different way. So assessments should be a tool for the people managing the education system to see if it's having the right impact or not. And the result of that is not to then go and classify children into good student, bad student. It's to then say, it's not working for this student. What do I need to do? I'm the adult here. I'm the one designing the system. I'm in control of the system. What do I need to do differently in order to get this student to develop? So, and what's happened with education, somehow these tests morphed into the destination rather than being a tool on the side that you use to see how well am I learning? Is my journey going okay? It became, how do I get a grade? And I'm sure you know this very well. I could enter into a foreign language class, let's say, German, and there's a very big difference between I'm here to learn German and I'm here to get an A in this German class, right? I can hack and find ways to get an A and memorize vocabulary and things like that. And that's very different than learning to speak German. And I think most people would agree the reason I should be in a class, a German language class, is to learn German. And guess what? If you are learning it, you will do well on the assessments. So what we were trying to do with you guys was just make you understand that the grades are not a destination. They're sort of an indicator of how things are going, and are things okay or not. And then, of course, when you're in the system, I think that's valid. We're talking a lot about things that require time to change. So what do you do now? What if someone's listening to this and I'm already in university, I'm in high school, and I think just being aware of these things and shifting your mindset to what is the purpose, what is going on with you, you can go through the current system in a very different way. So if you're the student that while you're learning something, you're asking yourself, hey, why are they teaching it this way? Why should I memorize it that way? What's the point of this? You're doing something very different and much deeper than the one that's just going to class. What's on the exam? Chapter 10 to 13, memorize that and then move on, right? So that's just a word on assessments and grades. When we move into the younger age group, there's something very interesting about this younger age group, and you see that time and time again across different from different places, different fields of study and philosophy, religion, etc. Time and time again, you see the importance of the first, 6 to 7 years of life. There's a book, a famous psychology book that says everything happens before the age of 6. Then you have most major religions will say, bring me a child below the age of 6, and we'll there's an opportunity to get them set in the right direction. And the reason for that is that the neural cement, if I can use that term, is still wet. The mind is super absorbent. The neural pathways are being laid. You're making connections at an incredibly rapid rate. The physical growth of your brain and what's going on inside in that age period is the most rapid period of development in your life, basically. Yes, you continue to learn, and you can always keep, a growth mindset and build new habits, etc. But the pace and the rate in those first 6 years of life, 6 to 7 years, is unlike anything that will come up at any time later. And there are numerous studies. You have longitudinal studies, 40-year studies where personality, character traits observed at the age of 5 and 6, and then you pick up those people decades later, and the same character traits are still there with an incredibly high correlation. So that's why this age is so critical. Both, and obviously then if it's so critical, both what the parents do at home, which I would argue is even more critical, but also what happens at school is very important. So what is it that we can do during this phase to best serve the needs of students? So I spoke about those two key phases, do I matter? And this, which is roughly the 0 to 3 period, and the next one, which is how do I do? How there's this desire to work, to do things, to act, to use your hands, and it's a tremendously rich experience if you're provided with the right fertile environment of learning materials and adults around you who understand how to give you that space and that environment to develop. So, as you know from the last episode, I really got interested in this space when I left. I took a sabbatical, left the world of employment for a year. Accidentally, without realizing it, got into education, fell in love, and that became my new journey. And as I'd said before, my mom had built this incredible, deep knowledge in this space, working with these children, and that was something we spoke about this before. This memory thing, because I was very interested in human development and psychology. Even before I knew I was interested in those things, I would just pay more attention and remember those things more. So obviously, growing up with an educator at home, those were things that I picked up on, and we had a lot of conversations, or I just had side knowledge around this topic that I was very interested in. So I got into it. And initially, the idea was, I'm coming with my contribution is to finance the second branch of the school, to bring my business, administrative experience to contribute to something that I'm not an expert in and is already working very, very well. And so at first it was, I'm going to help with the accounts, contracts for the staff, the business case for the new branch, putting processes in place, etc. And it was through a conversation with a person that I was interviewing to be the manager of the new school that the word curriculum came up. She said, well, there are different ways of doing things. There are different curricula. I do things in a different way. And that triggered, immediately I got a thought that said, yeah, it's true. There are different curricula. We do things in a certain way in our school. I went through a different curriculum. When you guys were going to school, we had to choose between different schools. So it opened up this area of this question, basically, which was, what are the curricula out there, and what is the best one? And that led to hours and hours of very excited, fun desk researching schools, reading books, listening to talks from TEDx to all kinds of contributors, following successful schools, looking at their videos, looking inside classrooms, etc. And it became quite clear, a few things became quite clear. One, that there is a tremendous need for change. It's screaming at us from all angles. Plus, as you know, my personal story and with education, so that really hit home for me, and so something different. And then it was a question of which one. There are many so-called alternative systems to the traditional system. Which one? And I like to, base myself on evidence and science and facts because I wanted to make sure that I understood why things were recommended. Not just this is better because somebody said so, but why. And I wanted to understand why. So, yeah, I went quite deep into that space. I mean, deep as in reading 60-page research studies on students that went through different systems and how they developed after one academic cycle on 5 or 6 developmental areas, numeracy, literacy, problem-solving skills, etc. And it became quite clear, there were a few systems that stood out. Montessori was one. Waldorf, sometimes called Steiner, was the other, and then Reggio Emilia, and some sort of hybrid, a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of Montessori. These were the things that were most common in this space. And I was doing two things at the same time, which was looking at these systems and then looking at our school and trying to see, how do they fit and which one and where do we go and where are we today. And Montessori just stood out as the most complete system. It had the whole psychological angle, so the respect for the psychology of the child, the inner human being, but at the same time, which was quite common amongst alternative systems, that's really the main thing they're typically trying to solve for, which is students aren't happy, so let's give them more freedom. Let's tailor make it to what students need. But what also stood out with Montessori amongst the alternative systems was that the math and science, program was so strong. It was so embedded, and the way it's taught, it was so beautiful. So that really appealed to me. That the evidence was very strong, the system was complete, and then you start getting, observations. You start noticing that the Google founders went to Montessori. That's interesting. And then how they speak about their famed offices, which where when I was in the world of employment in a multinational, it was the reference. The Google office. Google employees are so happy. Look at their office culture, and then you find out that they designed that culture. It was inspired by the classroom that they went to, the Montessori classroom they went to when they were young, right? So you get and that's something I love to do, which is putting together all these seemingly different data points into a hypothesis, checking it, changing it until I get something that seems solid. And the last step was it felt just very natural. And an interesting fact about the Montessori method, the lady who pioneered it did not want to call it the Montessori method. She said, please don't call it that. I'm just a scientific observer, observing kids and giving them what they need to fulfill their potential. So this should be called, I think she had a fancy name for it, the scientific natural method or something like that, which never caught on, and everybody wanted to call it Montessori. So we like to call it, the natural system. What would you and I and a bunch of people, if we got together and said, we've got these kids, should we do it this way or that way or this way or that way? And if we would probably end up on agreeing, if we agreed on the principles to best prepare them, to have happy students, to fulfill their potential, what would be the most natural system that we would agree on? And this is how we speak to parents and say, how would you teach math if that's what you wanted? Would you do it this way or this other way that seems so much more fun, more natural, more logical, etc.? So basically that stood out. And then the really nice thing was, because my mom is a real educator, she's not sitting there trying to teach to a test or to please, or to adjust for this traditional system that goes through its various trends. Many schools, private schools today, have these entrance exams. Can a child write their name at age 4 or 5? And that's some sort of that's somehow some sort of achievement, which you can get a child to memorize the shape of their names without really learning the alphabet. So it's meaningless. Or can they count to 10 or 20? Or do they cry if you put them in a room? And that's some sort of, if you brought them in with a bunch of strangers and they started crying, that's some sort of sign that there's something wrong with the kid. And these are all, my mom considered these things just nonsense. We are preparing children for life. We're infusing them with a passion for learning. And we're doing things in the most natural way possible, both in terms of how we build the campus, access to animals, to nature, to real objects, and also what we do in the classroom. So I found a lot of similarities with the system, and we started speaking about that. And we eventually adopted it and transitioned. And there was one element that was missing from our system that I felt was critical. which is the self-directed work, the space for autonomy and independence that Montessori champions. And as soon as, we had these conversations, my mom and I, it was like a light bulb for her. She said, it's so true. Over the years, we've allowed the adults to do everything. And, this is not how she was brought up, where she had to stitch her own dresses. People they didn't go and buy a dresser, they would build it. And so the whole practical life dimension, which is critical to Montessori, which is so natural to have children do purposeful work around the classroom and the house, like setting the table for your friends or washing the windows, not as a play, a plastic play, fake type of activity, but as a real thing, so the child connects that, I set the right number of plates down so everybody could eat, or I missed one person. And that's eventually how they learn math. They connect one-to-one correspondence between the number of plates and the number of friends I have, right? So it's purposeful math rather than let's count to 10 in a song. And obviously you memorize it and it sounds great, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you don't really know what you're talking about, right? So it's a whole very rich territory. We can get, into the ins and outs of it, but the bottom line was it ticked all the boxes. We looked at the gap, and we were very close. But then this autonomous work, and I remember, my mom calling me one day, really excited, and they started sending videos back. So keep in mind, I'm focusing on the second campus, so I'm not really spending that much time in the existing school. I did a lot in the beginning. But then I'm really focused on the new campus. So it's meeting with landlords, contractors, municipalities, regulators, etc., interviewing people, and then feeding this research back. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then one day I start getting these videos back. I've been the one sending videos, and now I get these videos back. And basically they flipped the dining experience was always a very important part of the school. Sitting down, having a soup, a salad, a hot dish every day on a beautiful, table with a beautiful setting, flowers in the middle, etc. But it used to be set by the adults, and now, because of the videos I had shared, it triggered a light bulb, and so my mom changed the system around where she got volunteers. So the kids now would set the table, and the adults found it very awkward. They'd be sitting there, this is their job normally. And we'll do it. The kids do it okay, and the kids are so excited. They're running around the room, putting the plates and putting the tablecloth, etc., and then feeding themselves. And so they went through this whole journey, and how they're eating better because now they're involved. So we unleashed the autonomy, and that started in 2015, and it's just been increasing in terms of where we apply and finding more opportunities to bring that autonomy in. And if you remember the basic needs, do I matter? So when you say to a child, hey, you're responsible for holding your own bag, for emptying the bag, that's an excellent way to nurture this. Yes, you do matter. You do count, and your I is important. And then to satisfy the how do I do, we call them the keys to the universe. We show you, what is length? And length is this beautiful sensorial exercise where you're playing with rods of different length, and your finger is tracing this really long one. It's a meter, so it takes a really long time. And then there's this little short one, and then there's a medium one, and then you have to sort them. And so that's how you embed length as a concept, which you will never forget for the rest of your life, right? So that's a little bit about the nursery years. So in summary, this super, super developmental, absorbent period. And what we provide is an environment that is as natural as possible. So it feels like grandma and grandpa's house rather than this Disneyland concept, of many preschools with multicolored, things and horses and unicorns and colored pencils and on the wall, all that stuff. It feels literally like grandpa and grandma's place. the furniture is real, it's wooden, the garden is real, you've got trees and you can plant things and you grow your own tomatoes. And then the classroom is this little replica of a society, that we would all dream to live in, which is a place which is very rich in terms of the different activities you can get involved in, where you have the freedom to choose which ones, and of course there are rules to guide that. So in terms of respecting other people's work and when someone's working with something, etc. And so it's this space where you have a lot of autonomy and where you get to construct, you build your own knowledge rather than have it downloaded and you have to regurgitate it back. And the closest example, the way to think about this classroom is a bit like the gym. When you go to a gym, think of you're in the gym, you've got the strength areas and you've got the weights from a kilo up to 100 kilos. You've got the cardio area where you're working the heart muscle, from the treadmill to the skiing machine to the rowing machine to whatever. And the flexibility, let's say flexibility area, stretching area, the rollers and all of that. And so you've got different dimensions in the same space, and people, depending on their competency in each of these areas, are working at their optimal level. So you've got a marathon runner running at 25K on the treadmill, but maybe lifting 20 kilos. And you've got someone else who might be lifting 30 kilos on the bicep curl, but is jogging on the treadmill. That's where they're at. Or someone completely new has never used a treadmill. And so there's a way of showing them how to use it. And so you do a presentation. Here's how you use a treadmill. Here's how you lift a bicep curl. And then off you are on your own. All the materials are out there. So imagine a classroom where all the chapters have been converted into materials, and you're not dependent on the teacher to come in every day and say, this is the one material we will discuss today, and all of you will do it, whether you find it too easy or too difficult. And I'm aiming for the average of the bell curve, right? If you're already ahead in this space, go ahead and go work with this advanced math material while the other child is doing an introductory material, and the children are moving around autonomously because we've shown them how to use these materials in an autonomous way. So there's a lot there, but the most important thing I think is that it's really serves those natural needs very, very well at that age.